restrictions, but the majority of the projects are going to fall into something that is either a case-by-case analysis that is provided for in the policy or a variance provided for in the policy, because they are located on watersheds that are very, very small. The median size watershed for our clients is 29 acres. And for those people that we have evaluated the policy restrictions on, the diversions would be reduced almost completely. The project yield would be such that it would result probably in a loss of vineyard land and a loss of business. State Water Board, by adopting this policy, if they do, and I understand it's in draft, but if they do, it really would be making land use decisions here in Mendocino County by imposing these types of restrictions on folks. I have a couple of questions, and I'm sorry for the length of time to get to them. It was mentioned that the AB 2121, the purpose was, am I out of time? I see the red line.
Technically, you are.
Technically, I'm out of time, aren't I? Okay, I will.
But I will grant you quickly, if you got a couple questions.
Couple of questions.
State the questions.
The AB 2121 does say that it's for purposes of water right administration, that the board is to implement or to adopt principles and guidelines, and it is for the purposes of water right administration. So I do think that the original intent was to try to address the backlog. That may not have been the way that the policy came out, but I do think that it was one of the stated intents. So I would like a response on that. I'll give my next two questions. And I guess I want to know if they've really looked at, they looked at 4 different projects and how the policy would affect them. We've looked at about 50 projects and how the policy would affect them, and I think all of them would end up in the variance criteria, meaning they wouldn't be able to have a viable project with the conditions that are being imposed. And so I guess I want to know, I didn't see any procedures in the policy of how people would go about getting a variance or working towards getting their projects approved under the policy. And I guess that means that if they don't, then they're out of luck. So I'd like that question answered. And then the last thing is that I know the backlog has been reduced. I've seen the numbers on the State Water Board website, but I don't think it's a result directly of permits being issued. I think there has been a lot of cancellations and withdrawals of applications when applicants were forced to start doing their own environmental documents. So I guess that's not really a question. I guess the question is the backlog reduction due directly to permit issuance or other factors? So
thank you, Ms. Whalen.
Thank you very much for the extended time. Sorry for going over.
We can respond to this if you like.
Please, Steve.
First of all, I think we can talk about, perhaps, Eric, would you like to address the 10 of the policy and perhaps the 50 analyses that we've been comparing, along with the consulting firm that Paula represents as Wagner and Bond Sr. We've been in close discussions with them on a regular basis, but maybe Eric can add some additional comments to that.
Well,
You're on.
Okay. With respect to the 50 projects that Paula Whalen mentioned, there isn't really a whole lot for us to say at this point, because we don't have the analysis to look at, so we're not sure. We're not sure if it was done consistent with what the policy says. We would hope that all that information, all that analysis, would be submitted as part of the comments that Wagner and Bonsignor will be submitting, but it's difficult for us to give you any kind of assessment as to that. As Steve mentioned, we looked at a smaller subset of projects, and some get we compared a set of projects in different watersheds, different types of projects, and we compared how much water they would get under the current DFG NIMS draft guidelines compared with the policy. Steve mentioned in some cases they would get roughly equivalent amount of water. In some cases they would get a little less water. In some cases they would get quite a bit less water. The effect of the policy on a project, it's difficult to look at on a broad scale. I'd like to be able to say out of the 300 pending applications, we'll be able to approve 150, and 150 will have to do site-specific studies. But the way the policy is designed, you actually need to look at each project on a case-by-case basis. It depends on how a project's getting water. Is it an on-stream dam? Is it a direct diversion? Depends on when a project's getting water, and it depends on where a project's getting their water from. It also depends on where the location of fish are with respect to the location of the diversion, and it depends on the degree to which a watershed already has existing diversions or existing impairments. We'll evaluate the information when we get it, but we haven't seen it at this point, so it's difficult to comment on that.
And maybe just a couple of follow-ups on the intent of the policy, and I can't speculate on the intent of the author and various folks that were involved in the development of the actual AB 2120 when it came through. The state board was monitoring a similar bill at the time, and it frankly it had kind of died, and we weren't following it any further when the trailer bill came through. But we were very concerned with the approach that was taken. Our opinions were expressed to the authors, and in some cases those that were supporting the bill. What came out was AB 2120, we can't really get into the details of that. But also to the backlog, Ms. Whalen suggested that is all the backlog attributed to issuing permits? No, it's not, and she is correct in some respects. We had a number of applications that in some cases were referred to the state board under enforcement proceedings. They were existing facilities that are in full operation without the benefit of water rights. And when we've gone back to them and said, look, you're going to have to do some CEQA reviews, you're going to have to do some water availability analysis, determine whether or not you get the amounts you're suggesting, independent of the policy. Some of these folks have withdrawn, have been canceled, and currently they're on our books for potential enforcement actions. There's quite a number of those. Also, there are some that have looked at the policy, have looked at some of our existing requirements, because the policy is not in effect yet. We're not applying this yet. So the existing procedures that the board is utilizing does require a fair amount of expenditure of time, monies, and in some cases consultants. Some of these folks have looked at their projects and saying maybe it isn't quite as viable as what I thought it was, and it may not be cost effective, and have withdrawn. Not very many of those facilities, though, are unconstructed. The vast majority of the projects we're looking at, and I'd say all but 3 or 4 of them in these 5 county areas that I have pending water rights before us, are unconstructed or at least partially constructed, and almost all of them are fully operational without the benefit of approvals from the state.
Okay, thank you. Kurt, followed by Deborah Kahn.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Supervisors, staff, Mr. Hara, your staff. My name's Kurt Schollerman. I own a vineyard in the Anderson Valley, the Farrington Vineyard. I have an application that has been on file since 1996. About 6 years ago, I modified it a bit. And I've never been able to get an answer from the water board one way or another. The rules change. I have to do another study. Something else has comes up. I have spent over $100,000 on this process, none of which, by the way, goes to anybody in Mendocino County. Regulate me. I want, we are willing to do anything that's reasonable, but we never get an answer. We don't get an approval. We don't get a denial. We get nothing. And so if you can put yourself in my shoes,